So, John, thank you so much for being willing to do this interview. And why don't we just start off with us telling us a little bit about you and what you do and who you are?
Sure. Well, thanks, Doug. I appreciate you having me here. My name's John Rosso. I own a sales training, coaching, and consulting business called Sandler Training by Peak Performance. Sandler Training is a global sales training coaching organization. There's 250 offices worldwide, and I own two of them, one in Pittsburgh and one in Charleston, South Carolina.
That's great. How did you get into that? Give us a just brief overview of your journey. How did you get into sales management?
It's the way I most people get into sales is completely by accident, right? So I went to school and I was an English major because I loved learning and I still love learning. And when I graduated with an English degree, there seemingly was not a whole lot of demand out there for someone with a liberal arts English degree. So I stumbled into sales because people said, what are you going to do, John? You going to teach? I said, no. You going to go to law school? No. Well, why don't you go into sales? You seem good with people. And the parentheses were, you've got no other qualifications. So, and since I loved books and I loved learning, my first job out of school was selling the Encyclopedia Americana in New York City. and I did that for about 20 months and was able to get an interview with IBM. And I interviewed with IBM, and IBM offered me a job, and I was excited. And they said, do you want to work in the mailroom or do you want to work as a security guard? And I said, I want to work in sales. And they said, yeah, we get it. We just don't necessarily hire people like you. So you got your choice. Get started in the mailroom or get started in the security guard. And I said, well, what's the difference? And they said, well, we buy you 2 suits in security. You work shift pay. We give you a shift pay differential. And so I spent the next 18 months at IBM marketing headquarters working as a midnight to 8 in the morning or 4 o'clock to midnight security guard. And then IBM kept their word and promoted me to sales back in 1986 in that neck of the woods. And that's where it all began.
That's great. Do you have any of those original encyclopedias?
I do. I loved them when I was young. I would, nowadays kids barely know what an encyclopedia is. You go to Wikipedia. But back then, encyclopedias cost about $1,300. That was not an insignificant investment. And I grew up with them. Anytime I had a question, my father would say, look it up in the encyclopedia. So I had a big passion for selling the encyclopedias, and I did well until we found out that, if someone stops paying, they come and repossess your encyclopedias,
really?
and they back out your commissions.
Wow.
And I found that was happening just a little bit too much, sort of lost my fire. And ended up at IBM, which was, again, a blessing and a godsend. And that started because IBM, when I went to sales, IBM back in 1986 invested round numbers about $250,000 per new sales rep. They trained us for a full year without even asking us to bring in any revenue. We had no quota. They trained us on sales. They trained us on people skills. They trained us on MIS or computer systems. For a full year, they would send us to Atlanta for 3 weeks, then back to our office, then Dallas for 3 weeks, then back to our office. It was a tremendous, it was a great opportunity to really be what was then kind of the Google or the Apple of the universe, and they invested a lot in their people, and it was a tremendous blessing.
Yeah, I'm curious. So, what was most effective about the way they trained you? Was it all classroom setting, where someone that had sales experience was telling you how to sell? Was it a lot of role playing and hands on? Did you get to execute a lot? What did you find to be most effective in training you?
Yeah, well, first of all, they had high expectations. Every time you came in, you flew in, they gave you a test. If you didn't get over 80 on that test, they flew you home. Wow. And if you got flown home more than once, you were out of the company. So everyone took it very, very seriously.
What was on the test? Product knowledge or?
Anything from product knowledge to sales knowledge. They would give you a study guide, but you had to be prepared when you came in because they were investing a lot of money with you. And then it was a combination of it wasn't just book learning. We had great instructors, but we did a lot of role playing, a lot of situational role play where we had a chance to both play the buyer or an observer or the salesperson, and it was tremendous skills. There were a lot of contests, and it was mostly young people, 23, 22, 25, 26, who came in and were just excited to work at that time with IBM. And it was a great, great learning environment.
Well, that's great. So I do want to talk about sales since it's what you do.
Sure.
I'm just curious, what does it take to be successful in sales? Were you just born salesman? Your gift just needed trained a little bit? Has it been practice, practice, practice? You guys train salesmen. What does it take to get them to sell?
I don't think you're born that way. I also don't think you've got to be an extrovert or an introvert. You can succeed at all levels. I think a lot of it has to do with a couple of key characteristics. One is passion or desire. There's got to be some desire, some passion to succeed or to believe in what you're selling. Otherwise, you can have all the skill sets and you're like a Ferrari sitting in the driveway with no gas, right? So you really need passion and drive and motivation. But past that, you also need commitment. And so my definition of commitment, there's a lot of people in sales, Doug, who seem to have a lot of desire, but they don't necessarily have the right amount of commitment. And my definition of commitment is you doing the things, Doug, that you said you would do, regardless of any circumstances and regardless as to how it makes you feel. And so I think passion is a piece, commitment's a piece, an overall positive belief system or outlook is a piece, and then being willing to take personal responsibility and not make excuses are four of the biggest criteria to be successful. You can learn product knowledge, you can learn sales technique, you can learn industry insights, but if I look at foundational pieces, it's desire, commitment, outlook and belief system supported by personal responsibility and not making excuses.
So you may have already answered it in that, but when you guys see sales people who just aren't making the cut, where do you see them missing it most often? Is it just those four areas they don't have, or do you see common mistakes over and over again?
Well, I see common mistakes over and over again. I see it often in commitment, meaning they have desire. They have an overall good outlook unless they've been beat up in the industry for so long that they've developed this commoditized mindset. So the two biggest problems I find are commitment, which means, again, that willingness to take action, regardless as to how you feel in the circumstances. And then I also see people struggle on excuse making. And the real sin, and that may be too strong of a word, but the real sin of excuse making is we develop a victim mindset, a mindset that makes us weak and not in control, because we say to ourselves, listen, if only the economy would shift. If only my competitors were not unethical. If only my company had the right products and services. And what we're essentially saying is I'm doing everything I need to do and I'm doing everything right. If only people outside of my control would change, my world would be perfect. But that's not the way it is. Personal responsibility would be the willingness to admit often difficult facts. All right, we don't have the best of breed product in the industry, but we are the best company to support that supports our customers. So in light of that, how do I find a way to succeed regardless that we may not have the best single product in the industry? That's personal responsibility. So I see commitment and personal responsibility being the two biggest things when you've got someone with a lot of skill sets that can hold you back.
Yeah, so talk about your sales journey. Obviously, you've been successful. You've grown two great organizations, which we'll talk about in a bit. But what did you have to grow through? What were some of the lids, so to speak, that you came up against, or the roadblocks on your path to being successful, and how did you overcome those?
Sure. So where I was fortunate, and a lot of that had to do with great parents on my side, is I had desire, right? I any place I've ever believed, any place I've ever worked, I've believed in my product and I've believed in myself, and if I didn't, I would go work somewhere else. I think a competitive advantage for me is I did have commitment and I did have personal responsibility, better than average, meaning, listen, I was willing to put myself way outside my comfort zone and do things that I just felt uncomfortable doing, but I knew I needed to do them regardless, whether that was a prospecting call, whether that was asking about money, whether that was asking for money, whether that was asking a closing question. All of those things weren't intuitively in my comfort zone, so those were helpful. So I had what I would call the makings of a success. What held me back, here, the analogy I use sometimes is things like your passion, commitment, responsibility, and outlook are things that can determine how high you ultimately fly. I had a series of obstacles to fly over. An example of an obstacle would be I was really wired from very, very young with something that we call too high a need for approval, which meant, I had this inner need to be liked and loved and accepted that clearly outweighed my need to go to the bank and sell honestly, ethically, and fairly. And so with that was a manifestation of I was unwilling at times to ask the hard questions. I was willing to accept a lot of stalls and excuses. And so once I learned that, what really helped for me was the Sandler rule that says you can't let the way you feel control the way you act. Instead, determine the way you want to act, and then let that way you act determine the way you feel. So that put me right in the crosshairs of comfort zone. And so I would be there and I would have this little reflex that I don't want to ask the hard question, but I would find myself understanding through commitment that I needed to ask that question regardless. So for me, I had a lot of the traits and characteristics that would make me a winner maybe, but I had a lot of obstacles to overcome. Like, for example, need for approval would have been one of those. Or uncomfortable talking about money. I grew up in an environment where talking about money was taboo. If I asked my father how much his 1974 Ford Falcon cost, he would say, it's none of your business. And if how about Joe's bike across the street? What do you think Joe paid for his bike? Hey, it's none of your business. And my messages were, it's impolite. Don't talk about it. No one wants to talk about it. Then I go into sales by accident with an English degree, where my whole life is, do you have any money and will you give it to me? I don't want to ask, though, because I'm afraid someone's going to smack me. So I had to overcome those weaknesses.
So you're at a place now where you no longer need approval, you don't fear rejection, you just tear it up every day.
Yeah, I'm better than I was. What helped me was really understanding that what I do and how I perform on a daily basis is not really a measurement of my self-worth. So in my early days, where I certainly grew up, for instance, going to church, but I can't say I had a great spiritual connection. Listen, if I had a bad day at work, or I had a bad day at home, or if I had a great day, I felt good. When I began to understand that my role performance on any given day, whether I made a sale or didn't make a sale, whether I succeeded or not, was not directly tied to who I was and where my identity was. And for me, when I understood Christianity better and unconditional love, it was a lot easier for me to separate out my identity and role. So I still fail, but instead of failing, sort of feeling as a failure, which then causes car reluctance, my ability to respond to that adversity really has increased significantly because I'm willing to continue to take the risks. If you take risks and fail and then take it personally, no one likes that feeling, so they stop taking risks. What's helped me is to understand that my identity is not in whether I'm a great salesperson or not, or a good salesperson, or an effective leader or business owner. It lies somewhere else. And there's a lot of comfort in that allows me to be gutsy.
That's so good. Last sales question. If you just hired me, what would my first year? What essentials would you want me to get under my belt in the first year? I have no sales experience. I'm coming in, but I want John Rosso to turn me into a sales machine. What would you be having me doing and focusing on for that year?
A couple things. One is we would take an inventory of your belief systems, because one of the things we find is without understanding what's driving your behavior, it's likely some beliefs, like the one I gave you earlier, like it's impolite to talk about money. So we take an inventory of your belief system, and then begin to understand and work with you on what are best practice beliefs and how they dovetail into your values and what's important to you. So that's foundational. From a selling perspective, most people need to learn that the sales call's not about you, right? No one's looking to see how smart you are, and no one cares that the company was started back in 1932. And so what happens is too many salespeople are amateurs. By that they mean, once they understand their product, we just can't wait to tell everybody about your product. So in the early days, there's a couple of steps. One, we've got to develop the human relation skills to very, very quickly develop an environment of trust and comfort, connection, and what I would call equal business stature. Even if you're a 22-year-old, the way you carry yourself can develop equal business stature. And then early on, the magic of selling well is really beginning to set good agendas that are mutually agreed to with you and the prospective buyer or the prospective client, where we've agreed on the agenda. And one of those agenda questions is, I want to be able, Doug, to really understand your world, ask you some questions, understand your goals and your wants and your needs, but more important than that, understand their priority, understand, are they important enough for you to take action? So the skill sets of really listening, asking the right kinds of questions, asking questions as follow-up questions to really qualify or disqualify an opportunity is where we would spend our time. Now, in order for you to do that, you've also got to get good at prospecting, getting in front of potential clients, whether it's by networking, referrals, making a warm call or a cold call, using social media. Those are kind of the basics of what we would need to do to get someone started.
That's great. So we're going to move on beyond sales, but
Sure.
Obviously you do sales training. If someone's listening to this and they're in sales or about to start a sales position, how can they connect with Sandler and Peak Performance, what you guys are doing, and serve you guys and be a part of your program?
Sure. Easiest way is our website is www.peakperformance.sandler.com. Great way to engage. We've got so many resources, Doug, on there. We've got downloadable white papers on key strengths and weaknesses of salespeople, ways to talk to gatekeepers, ways to understand decision process. Really a lot of resources and a lot of videos with video tips. So that's peakperformance.sandler.com. You can, my Twitter, and you could interact with me on Twitter, is at jrosso1370, at jrosso1370, and our office with Lindsay and Cindy and Len, you can reach at 412-928-9933, 412-928-9933 might be the best ways.
Great, and I'll include links to all of that on the show notes.
Great, thanks.
So I want to move a little bit into business. So obviously you got trained at IBM, and eventually you wanted to launch and start your own company. Can you just talk about that process to everyone listening who's an entrepreneur and maybe they're thinking about launching? What's that process like? Was it difficult? What's the journey been like of an entrepreneur?
Sure. Yes, it was difficult. Now, I always knew when I was young I would end up working in my own business. And I remember meeting my wife early on in my life, maybe about 25 years old, 24 years old, and 23 years old, young, and literally saying to her, someday, in my early 30s, I'll have my own business. And I was working at IBM at the time. And really, I sort of got pushed in the business. One of the things that happened in IBM in the late 80s and early 90s is they had some very difficult economic times and were laying off all kinds of people. And they had moved me to Endicott, New York, which is in kind of the southern tier of upstate New York, to go help sell anything that plant can do. This plant used to have 20,000 employees, and now it was down to 6,700. And we did such a good job, really did a great job selling outsourced manufacturing services, chip design, injection molding, all stuff that it was wild to sell all this stuff. That the plant manager said, John, you guys have done a great job. Relax. Don't do anything. We can't take any more work. Now, in the old days, IBMers weren't known for relaxing. And so I would get home at 4 o'clock, and my wife would say, what are you doing home at 4 o'clock? You look terrible. I said, I'm exhausted. I'm not doing anything. And so idle hands are the devil's work, if you will. And so I had time for the first time in my 11-year career at IBM to say, what am I going to do now? And I really began to look at manufacturing companies. I looked at a lot of places that I might buy, and then thought to myself, you know what? The thing I'm passionate about, the thing I like the most is sales. And then struck out on my own sales training business and moved to Pittsburgh, pretty much sight unseen, to start a business in Pittsburgh. I was living in upstate New York because it was rated as the most livable city. And I put a phone line in my basement and made cold calls and didn't know a soul in Pittsburgh. And I would say for the first 6 months, I got sick to my stomach or dry heaved every single day in that basement because it was not a comfortable thing to do, but I think that's where commitment came in. My wife wasn't working. I had 2 kids. I now have 4. Someone's got to be able to bring an income in, and it was pressure. And what really helped me was to build an accountability network of people who cared enough to challenge me, and who cared enough to follow up with me to make sure I was doing the things I said I was going to do, because you could very easily spiral, in a negative way, going, this is not working. I'm not making the progress. Maybe it makes sense to go back to corporate America. And for me, it was probably 18 months of, I don't know. I mean, this is hard. Before I kind of felt, you know what, this is going to work. So a full 18. I'm 22 years in the business now, but the first 18 are as memorable as my wedding day and the birth of my children, because they were that emotionally charged as difficult times.
So why didn't you give up, right? Why didn't you get... So, because again, a lot of people have ideas. How did you know what you had to offer was actually a market fit, right? And not just say, you know what, no one probably I mean, I guess it's sales training.
Yeah.
People need it, but in general, I mean, maybe they didn't need what you had. Why didn't you give up?
Well, here's... I believed... well, there's a couple of reasons why I believed it was a market fit. There are people in the sales training industry who are succeeding, right? There's clearly a market for it. Now, what I would do is, and this has been very, very helpful for me. When I didn't succeed, I didn't cast it on you. If you were my prospect, I didn't go out and say, oh, well, I called on Doug. He had no money, so what are you going to do? Instead, I turned it internally and said, well, listen, I met with Doug. Clearly, he's got money. I was in his office, and his lights are on. He's paying the light bill at least. Why is he not paying me? What could I have done differently or better? Because I really believe Doug would have been truly well-served if he would have become a client, but he didn't. And then I would really spend time with, again, mentors or internally to say, what could I have done differently? In my early years, what got me... It'll sound weird, Doug, but my motivation is every time I screwed up a sales call, which was a lot, I would write down the amount of money how much money that lesson cost me. So if that lesson cost me $20,000 in sales, and in my first year, I had multiple millions of dollars of lessons. So the good news was I made a vow that I said, listen, there's no such thing as mistakes, only lessons. But lessons will be repeated until you learn them. And so I posted my lessons learned on with the dollar value, and made a commitment to do my best not to make that same mistake. And so I made a lot of mistakes, but I didn't make a whole lot of them twice or 3 times. And so they were tremendously formative learning years, those first 18 months.
So talking about bouncing back from failure, what's maybe the worst failure, the lowest point in your life, and how did you bounce back out of that?
In business, in life, in which one?
Whatever you want to share. Either one's fine.
You know, I'm an optimist. I mean, one of the things a lot of people don't know that I have 4 kids. My daughter, who's now 20, got very, very chronically ill at about 12 years old, and was sick from 12 years old to 19 years old. Sick enough that she couldn't go to school. She was fed by a feeding tube. She couldn't stand or sit for more than a couple of minutes without passing out. And all the while continuing to grow a business, all the while continuing to perform at very, very high levels. That was a lot of adversity. And again, I credit my daughter, who's got a tremendous spirit. I credit my wife. I credit God more than anything. It's a miracle now that she's doing well. She spent the last 6 months living in London on her own at 20 years old. But that was a lot of adversity, and I think we really came through it with a lot even more faith than we started with, and more appreciation of each other, and the fact that gratefulness is probably the secret sauce to a good, fulfilling life. And you really can't be depressed if you're thinking about other people. You only get depressed when you're thinking about yourself.
No, that's good.
And so that was probably the biggest adversity. It was a 7.5-year span of adversity, and we took her everywhere, different hospitals, Johns Hopkins and Cleveland clinics, but it was it really took a lot of strength, conviction, and faith to move through that. And faith, I think, is a big piece on any piece of adversity. People's attitudes are more future based. In sales, you could have had the worst month of your life, but if you're looking at your next month and you see a bunch of great new appointments set up and you feel very good about the opportunities, you're positive. On the other hand, you could have the greatest month of your life. You cashed more commission checks than you thought possible. But as you look forward, you see clients either leaving, going away, or no good appointments set up. Your attitude is bad. So we tried to keep a very future-based attitude, and grateful for the past and a future-based attitude. And that was, I think, true for any adverse situation and overcoming that adversity.
Yeah, well, while we're on the subject of faith, I'm just curious, how does faith play a role in what you do? Obviously, you work with nonprofits and churches, but primarily you work with business owners, salespeople in business. Does faith play a big role in your day-to-day at work? Do you just try to keep that away from work? I'm just curious.
No, I don't think you want to take. I don't think you want to take it away from work at all. I mean, one of the things we do is teach people to journal on a daily basis, and often. And we even share our journals with some clients and certainly with the people at our firms. And in our journal, one of the things we'll do in our journal, there's certain sales things. Like one of the things we do is talk a little bit about what are the specific pay time, strategic and important but not urgent activity I should do today. What are the 2-3 things? But we've also got a piece for attitude affirmations and gratitude and prayer. And I think it centers you, and I think it helps you be gutsier and stronger, and helps you develop a sense that there are bigger and greater things, and if you go into, your intentions count in many cases much more than your technique. And so by being centered on that, and I think, I teach those classes now where I tell folks there's a separation from identity and role. And I ask people to rate themselves on a scale of 0 to 10 if they were sitting on a desert island, all alone, just them, no roles, no doctor, no lawyer, you're not a mother, you're not a father, you're not a daughter, you're not a salesperson. How do you rate yourself? Number one answer I get is 6s and 7s. And when folks understand, and I ask them now, what's the nicest place you ever been to? Hawaii. Well, how would you rate that? They go 10. I said, understand now, here you are, a creation, right? In the image of God, you gave yourself a 6, and yet you gave a pile of rocks and sand and dirt and water a 10.
Wow, yeah.
And by the way, when you held your baby for the first time, assuming some of these folks have babies, what'd you give the baby? And they all say, I gave the baby a 12. I said, exactly. So assuming for a second, without going into your background, that your parents gave you a 10 or a 12, how did you decide to get to 6 or 7? And what happened is people around you took shots at you. You know what, Doug? You're not as good as you think you are. I mean, if you were good, we would have met all of our sales goals. And then we let other people's opinion sort of batter us down to change our identity as to who we think we are. And when you can really understand where your identity comes from, and that's bulletproof. It allows you to be tougher in a positive way, to take those risks, and not worry as much about failing. There was a cool thing I just saw. I can't remember her name, but the founder of Spanx, it's women's undergarments, I guess. She said she would sit down at the table with her father, and her father would ask her, "What'd you fail at today? I want to know what you failed at." And if she gave him failures, he was like, "Listen, that's not a problem. The only way to fail is by failing to try." And if she had no failures, he would say, "Come on, you're not taking enough risks. You're not pushing yourself. There's enough lessons." Now, I didn't do that with my kids growing up. In retrospect, I wish I had. But that understanding where Christ is and where your identity comes from helps you be bulletproof like that.
That's good. On the business end, so you went from a personal performer in sales at IBM to actually starting your own business, to then your business grew. You had to build a team, which I'm sure required totally different skill sets than you may have been used to, and maybe it didn't. What did that journey look like? And can anyone take that and learn the skills to build a team, to build a staff, to do the accounting, and all the stuff that as a salesperson you probably wanted nothing to do with?
Yeah, so I was fortunate where I'm good with numbers, and I'm numerically oriented even as a business. If you're not, you better find someone who is, because business is not about sales. Although sales is the engine, business is about profit, right? Meaning sales minus expenses, of course, equals profit. And you can't run a business for long without profit, or you can run a profitable business, but if your cash flow is all screwed up, it's not going to last long. So that wasn't the hard part. For me, the hard part wasn't the numbers. For some, it will be. For me, building that team, again, requires so much other-centeredness. And I'm in a business where folks struggle to grow their sales training business beyond them. Because if they're good salespeople, they're good performers, they're good trainers, and so again, I may be too squishy, but love is the killer app, if you will. The reason why people left six-figure paying jobs to initially come to work with me in the late 1990s and the early 2000s, and many of them have been with me 15, 16, 17, 18 years, leaving high-paying six-figure jobs to come on a virtually 100% commission gig, is they really, A, were passionate about it, B, they wanted to control their destiny, and C, they really felt that I would be there for them, I would coach them, and we were going to share the pain and the struggles together, because there's a lot of reasons and a lot of opportunities for these folks to have punted out early and gone back to corporate America and made tremendous money, but they sort of stuck to it because they were growing as human beings. They felt they were becoming what they wanted to become, and they had a support system where, I hate to say it, but I think love was behind it. I mean, they just felt like they were cared for and loved, and the motives were not to simply use them as a cog to generate revenue for my company. It was an opportunity where you can really help people have a lot of fun and make money with the support you need to continue to grow and learn.
That's good. What do you look for in team members? I'm just curious over the years.
Yeah, sure. I think what I said earlier, I mean, desire, commitment, responsibility, and outlook are huge. In our business, there really needs to be a passion for education and learning. If I'm interviewing, I can't tell you, Doug, the many people, I can, it's a lot. When I interview people, I say, you have any hobbies? I like to golf. What do you do for improvement? Well, I actually take lessons every Saturday. Wow, good for you. How about in business? Tell me about the last either business book you read, seminar you went to, training you've gone through. People blank out. They're doing nothing to develop themselves on their career side, and that's a very quick way to get eliminated, at least from my funnel, because we need to stay on that cutting edge of expertise as to how we help our clients grow their businesses. And so we've got to stay fresh and current and love learning and love applying learning in real life situations. So I'm looking for that as well. I'm looking for someone who has that passion to be in, not just in any business, because if you've got passion to be in business, buy a McDonald's, but passion to be in a business where passion to be in the sales and sales management and leadership, customer service training world.
That's good. So while we're on that, what do you do to grow personally? What have you done over the years? Are you mainly a reader? Do you just talk to us a little bit about your personal growth plan and what that looks like, and then maybe some resources you recommend. What are the top 3 books you find yourself giving away most often? Podcasts, whatever you do to grow.
Sure. I am an avid reader. It's probably to a fault. You can take any strength and play it to a weakness. So I'm an avid reader. I personally take probably about 26 full days a year outside of work for personal development. For a sales guy, if you will, that's a whole lot of time. That's a full month being out for personal development. So I do all of the above. I listen to audiobooks. I listen to podcasts. I haven't listened to the radio or Rush Limbaugh or any of that stuff since 1991. So podcasts, audiobooks, books,
any that you'd
workshops.
Recommend? I mean, what podcasts do you listen to most often? What books do you give away most often, or read most?
Yeah. So let me start with a couple of books. There's one book I've been recommending a lot that really speaks to the mindset behind being an effective consultant / salesperson. It's called Getting Naked. I don't know if you're familiar with the book Getting Naked from Patrick Lencioni. Lencioni's a pretty well name in the leadership circles. He's written 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, 5 Temptations of a CEO. Getting Naked's an excellent book there. There's a book called Leadership and Self-Deception. that has changed my life. Have you read that one,
Yeah, I
Doug?
have, yeah.
Okay. That's changed my life every single day since I've read it 10 years ago. Because the theory, again, behind it is don't betray yourself. If you think to yourself you want to do good, and then you don't do it because you begin to justify all the reasons, that they call that betraying yourself. So I love leadership and self-deception. It's been tremendous in that regard. Standard books. I've got my 20-year-old daughter now reading The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Nice. Right? So some of those old timers are really good. Sandler's got some very, very good books.
You have
one's
a book?
called. I have a book called Prospect the Sandler Way. If you want to do more in prospecting, it's gone well. I mean, it's sold a lot of copies, and we've got a lot of good feedback from that. So I've tried to vary my reading over the years and be a little bit more all non-business, but I keep getting drawn back to that flame of business like a moth and reading a lot of really good business books. So those are a couple that I would recommend that to me were really worthwhile. One on the human relation skill side, one on the belief side.
That's good. So you talked a little bit about money earlier and people left 6-figure jobs. I'm just curious, in sales, what have you learned about having money just as an individual? Again, you have all these hungry 20-somethings that want to be the next Mark Zuckerberg. But
Sure.
What does having money actually do for you? And how do you view it just as a person? And then what encouragement do you have for young leaders who want to make a lot of money? I'm just curious.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, money's not going to, I know, listen, there's a lot of adages. Money's not going to make you happy. Although, listen, the lack of money is not going to make you happy either,
Yeah.
right? So money, to me, money is amoral, right? It's not, certainly if you choose to make it a god, it's probably going to misserve you because there's always going to be someone richer than you are, and there's going to be people richer than you are that didn't work as hard as you to get that rich. So and the beauty about what money is what the freedom that money allows you to do. I think it's important to have financial goals. I think the reason why it's important to financial goals is to sort of figure out what that means to you and what that means to your family, what that means to your community, what that means to your church. There are people, young folks, who tell me, hey, listen, I'm looking to retire at 30. I want to become a multimillionaire at 30 and I'm retired. And people ask me, I'm 55 now, I just moved down to Charleston 3 years ago. They say, how long will you stay in the business? And I am not kidding when I say I've just put together my next 25-year plan. I'm planning to stay in business 25. So regardless of whether we're financially independent or not, the old adage again is if you really love what you're doing, you'll never work a day in your life. So I think it's about the growth in the process. Having said that, you got to be careful in sales because I really get salespeople angry when I tell salespeople they're not money motivated. And most people are not money motivated. What they are is a lack of money motivated. So for instance, if they made if they're living their dreams on $150,000, they don't have to make $250 or $350 or $400. Now, if they went back to $50,000, they would be highly motivated. So most people get into a money comfort zone, for good or for worse. The worst part about it is they let that money concept. Let's use a round number like $100,000. They let it dictate their belief system and their behaviors. So they look, act, sound like a $100,000 person when they don't have to do a whole lot different to become a $200,000 or $300,000 or $400,000 person. So I think the bad part is if you let your money concept, what you think you're worth, sort of dictate what you want to earn, you sort of chase that number and then settle when you get there, as opposed to really focusing on doing the right things, understanding what it takes to be successful. What you'll do is you'll turn around and go, man, I blew away my financial goal and I'm keeping going. So again, I've been blessed in the business that way, but it really has happened. There's a lot of times I was willing to settle, but it took people outside of me to shake me up and go, don't focus on the money. Focus on what you're doing well. Focus on continuing to doing the right things, and the money takes care of itself. And I found that to be absolutely true.
That's very, very good. I I forget what I was just going to ask you. I had a great question lined up. So we were talking about money, sales. Well, so all right, I just want to focus a little bit on young leaders. I'm sure that question will come back to me. But talk to me about young leaders. So what do you see in the next generation coming up? What advice would you have for young leaders? I'll just leave this very, very open for you. But what thoughts do you have about young leaders aspiring?
I like this generation. They're more global than I think we are. You know, most of the people I know my age, their kids have spent a year in Spain or a year in South Africa or you name it. So they're much more global. They're more socially oriented and mission oriented than maybe the baby boomers who would get a knock. And I'm one of those who would get a knock on just really working hard just for financial security, and I'll cop to that absolutely. So I like the spirit of the younger generation and the younger leader. There's an impatience that could get in their way, right? There's an impatience. You know, my son, I've got a son who just got married 23 July 2nd.
Congrats.
And yeah, thanks. It's tremendous, and he just moved to Greensboro, North Carolina, and he's interviewing for jobs. Just moved there a week ago, and well, I don't know if I want to take this job. It's not my perfect job, and I say, I get it, you know, but there still are some dues to be paid, and there's learning opportunities. I say, listen, my first 4 years were 2 years security guard, and 2 years encyclopedias, 2 years security guard. You know, I mean, I didn't wake up and say, if only I can be, you know, an encyclopedia salesperson or a security guard. And there's nothing wrong with either one of those two professions. But I didn't grow up wondering about that. So there's a little bit in understanding, in some delayed gratification. I think there's a social mission there, but there is some success and power behind delayed gratification, and I think there's a little bit to be learned there, and that comes in investing in yourself, and that comes in investing in the right opportunity, even if it's not the highest paid job where you see the most growth coming early on. Focus on growth. If you focus on growth and build a skill set, and the world gets to determine what you're worth, then you'll find what you're worth, right? So if you're working with someone, they determine what you're worth. If you're an entrepreneur, the world determines what you're worth. And early on, focusing on the skill sets to provide real value are much more valuable than perhaps starting at a higher salary, but capping your development, in my opinion.
It's excellent. So I remember my question. You talked about accountability, and when you first started your company, a lot of people held you accountable to do what you said you were going to do. I'm sure you're familiar with mastermind groups. It's something we do with our organization. Love those. Can you talk about, and even I'm familiar with Sandler, you guys have accountability calls every week where you guys have to tell, you know, everything going on in your sales pipeline. Can you just talk about the power of accountability and what that looks like, and how, if someone's listening to this and they say, hey, I have all these goals, but I can never hit them, and it's probably because of a lack of accountability, how can someone set up an accountability structure in their lives that will enable them to go further than they could? Sure.
First of all, I live on the premise that people judge themselves by their intentions. They judge everyone else by their behavior. So I believe there's not a salesperson on the earth. This is likely untrue, but I choose to believe there's not a salesperson on the earth who is capable enough to hold him or herself accountable. We're too good as salespeople to convince ourselves that there's other more important things we need to do than what we need to do. So accountability outside yourself holds you to the standard of behavior, not intentions. That's good. It's much more objective. Now, in setting up an accountability group, I think motive counts. Right? It's okay to have some inner competitiveness. I think that's a strength of salespeople, to have some competitiveness. But the person who's sitting across from me has to have a couple of requirements. One, they've got to be personally goal-oriented, passionate, and driven themselves. Because I can't drag you up a hill, right? If I'm your accountability partner, I can't push a rope up a hill. It's just hard to do. So there needs to be that overall sense or that feeling that you truly want the best for me. And to me, where I've struggled, there's a difference between being nice and being kind. Being nice would be for me not to call you out, Doug, on not necessarily doing all the appropriate activities this week because I want to be nice. I don't want to start a fight with you. Kind to me says we've got enough of a relationship of trust and comfort where I'm willing to call you out in love for the things you've not been doing, because in the end, that's the kindest thing to do. So I think you've got to find someone who's willing to be kind but not nice, someone who's personally driven, who's willing to raise your expectations, and someone's willing to challenge you when you start selling yourself about all the reasons why you can't do the things you need to do.
That's really good. I just want to end with a few personal questions. If you could go back and have coffee with 20-year-old John Rosso selling encyclopedias, what would you tell him?
Don't worry so much. I've got all this gray hair. I've worried about paying the bills. I've worried about sending the kids to college. Worry about doing the right thing consistently. Continue to grow. Don't be handicapped by scarcity thinking and fear. Understand. It is an abundant world, and it's going to work out. I mean, one of the things I say now is it always works out in the end. If it's not working out, it's just not the end, right? And so I've probably put some undue stress on a day-to-day basis in my life in those early years, just worried about throwing up for 6 months of my first 6 months. So I would have taught him the IR lesson, the separation between identity and role, because the 20-year-old John Rosso didn't know it. Would have been, and that's where Sandler's been a blessing. I've grown more, and I went to IBM school for years, but I've grown more from I started this business at 33. I'm 55. I've grown more in these years, in any one of these years, it seems, than maybe from 20 to 30 combined. So Sandler's really provided that environment to challenge and to understand where growth comes from and separating out that identity and role. So I would have had that conversation with the 20-year-old, and provided some glimpses into what the future could look like if you simply continue to do the right thing and stay committed.
That's a great answer. Out of everything you've accomplished so far in your life, what are you most proud of?
Again, that goes personally. I hate to be cliche, but I am proud that I've got 4 tremendous kids who care about others, who grew up in a house where they had a chronically ill sister during their formative years, and statistics on chronically ill kids are not that different than statistics on death of a child. Divorce rates could be high. So, and each of my kids had sacrifices to make and to adjust their lives. I mean, we hadn't taken a family vacation for 7 years because my daughter can't travel. We used to take family vacations everywhere. So I'm proud that my daughter's got a spirit, just a spirit of love and a winner, and my children were able to adapt to that. And my wife and I grew closer through the adversity, and certainly closer to God during the adversity. That's by far the proudest thing I've ever done in my life, the biggest accomplishment in my life.
That's beautiful. And looking back one day on your life, what do you want your kids to say about you at your funeral?
Wow, never thought about that question. Yeah, never thought about that question. I think they would say, what I would like them to say is he was always there for us. He was willing to listen. He was a lot of fun, had a really good sense of humor, and was always willing to take on a new skill. I mean, the one thing he would have taught us is continue learning, right? The currency in life is there's an old, I think it was Charlie Tremendous Jones or whatever it was, but said, the only difference between you at 20 and you at 50 are the people you meet and the books you read. And so I'm just a believer that my daughter is in the midst of setting up hopefully setting up an interior design business that she'll start in London at 20 years old.
That's incredible.
And so she's reading How to Win Friends and Influence People. She's reading Think and Grow Rich. She's reading The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. There's not a lot of 20-year-olds doing that. Nope. But I think there's an understanding that learning and growing, especially as technology adapts and changes, always keeps you relevant and then valuable to others around you. So that would be a nice legacy.
Yeah. And I'll just leave this open-ended. If you had to leave our audience with anything else, young leaders, young professionals, anything else you want to leave us with that we didn't cover?
Be grateful. It's so easy. We've got so much we see going on today with terrorism here and terrorism there, and it's very, very easy to shrink your world down to your problems, because we're always going to have them. And I promise you, there are people, I don't even know your situation, but there are people who are worse off than you. And so the ability to spend time in prayer and being really grateful for the things we have in life, and don't get caught up in the concept of this wasn't fair, or because again, circling in that world of chronically ill children, if you want to see people where I could say, boy, that's not fair. It's gratitude has been for me a huge source of comfort and joy and happiness. So you can always want more. It's nothing wrong with that. But I think if you're not grateful for what you have, you might be miserable wanting that more. And so that's been tremendous for me.
Yeah, I started writing gratitude thoughts in my journal. I think when I started with Sandler, and I was doing it this morning. I was having a pity party, wrote down half a page of what I was grateful for, and it all disappeared very quickly. Yeah. Well, I'm grateful for your time. I'm grateful that you were willing to pour into us, so thank you for that. This was a tremendous interview.